When people think about the most feared weapons of the Second World War, they often mention the terrifying rate of fire of the German MG42, a weapon so fast it earned the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw. Allied soldiers learned to dive for cover the moment they heard its ripping sound. But on the other side of the battlefield, German troops had something equally terrifying to fear: the deep, heavy, unmistakable boom of the American M2 Browning. Unlike the MG42, which relied on sheer speed, the M2 relied on raw power. And when it fired, it didn't just suppress, it obliterated. The story of the M2 begins at the end of World War I, when warfare was rapidly evolving. Tanks had appeared on the battlefield, armored aircraft were becoming more common, and traditional rifle-caliber machine guns were no longer enough. Standard .30 caliber rounds could cut down infantry, but they struggled against armor plating and reinforced positions. Recognizing this limitation, General John J. Pershing demanded a new kind of weapon, one capable of firing a half-inch projectile at extremely high velocity, powerful enough to penetrate armor and destroy aircraft. The task was given to America's most brilliant firearms designer, John Browning. Browning took his proven M1917 water-cooled .30 caliber machine gun and scaled it up dramatically. But creating a larger gun wasn't enough. It required an entirely new cartridge. The result was the .50 BMG, or 12.7 by 99 mm round, a cartridge designed for high velocity, smooth feeding, and devastating impact. At the time, few realized that this round would go on to become one of the most influential military cartridges ever created. The early version of the weapon, introduced as the M1921, was water-cooled and primarily intended for anti-aircraft defense. It was undeniably powerful, but it was also extremely heavy. In full configuration with tripod and cooling system, it weighed well over 100 pounds, making it impractical for infantry maneuver warfare. Aircraft initially struggled to carry it as well, since early planes lacked the structural strength for such a heavy system. For a brief period, it seemed like the weapon might remain limited in use. However, after John Browning's death in 1926, engineers continued refining his design. They introduced a universal receiver that allowed different barrel configurations, made feeding adaptable from either side, and developed air-cooled heavy barrels suitable for ground combat. The improved version officially became the M2 Browning, and by the time World War II erupted, it was ready to prove itself. In the skies over Europe and the Pacific, the M2 quickly established dominance. The B-17 Flying Fortress carried up to 13 M2 machine guns to defend against enemy fighters. The P-47 Thunderbolt mounted 8.50 caliber guns in its wings, delivering a concentrated storm of firepower. The Douglas A-26 Invader could carry even more in certain configurations. In aircraft use, the rate of fire was increased significantly, sometimes reaching up to 1,200 rounds per minute. While that matched the firing speed of weapons like the MG42, the difference lay in the size and energy of the projectile. Each .50 BMG round carried multiple times the kinetic energy of a standard 8mm rifle bullet. That meant aircraft engines could be shattered, fuel tanks ignited, and structural components ripped apart. German pilots quickly learned that flying into concentrated .50 caliber fire was often a fatal mistake. On the ground, the M2 became equally feared. Mounted on tanks, half-tracks, jeeps, and defensive emplacements, it gave American forces overwhelming suppressive power. Unlike lighter machine guns, the M2 could punch through brick walls, concrete barriers, and sandbag fortifications with sustained fire. It outranged most infantry weapons and delivered between 5 and 10 times the energy of standard rifle rounds. Even armored vehicles were not entirely safe. Sustained .50 caliber fire could damage tracks, disable optics, and penetrate thinner side or rear armor. In the Pacific theater, lightly armored Japanese tanks proved particularly vulnerable. German forces in Europe also noticed something critical. American troops rarely suffered ammunition shortages. While German units often had to conserve fire, American positions could unleash relentless streams of heavy machine gun rounds, overwhelming enemy advances both physically and psychologically. A persistent myth emerged during and after the war claiming that the .50 caliber had been banned against personnel by the Geneva Convention because of its destructive effects. This was never true. There was no such prohibition. However, the myth reflected the weapon's fearsome reputation. The energy transfer of a .50 BMG round is immense, and although it was designed primarily for anti-material purposes, its impact on the human body was devastating. Soldiers who witnessed its effects understood why it inspired such fear. Technically, the M2 operates on a short recoil principle. When fired, the barrel and bolt recoil together while locked. After a brief rearward movement, the barrel stops while the bolt continues backward, extracting and ejecting the spent casing. A powerful spring then drives the bolt forward, chambering a new round from the disintegrating belt and firing again as long as the trigger is pressed. This robust and simple system allows the weapon to handle extremely high pressures reliably, which explains why it has remained in service for over a century. One of the most intimidating configurations of the M2 was the M45 quad mount, commonly known as the Quad .50. This system mounted 4 M2 machine guns on a single rotating platform. Originally designed for anti-aircraft defense, it could unleash roughly 40 rounds per second combined. When Allied air superiority reduced the threat from enemy aircraft, the Quad .50 found new purpose in ground combat. It could shred tree lines, fortified buildings, and attacking infantry with terrifying efficiency. The psychological impact of facing 4 synchronized heavy machine guns was enormous. The .50 BMG cartridge later found new life in precision shooting. During the Vietnam War, Marine sniper Carlos Hathcock experimented by mounting a telescopic sight on an M2 and firing single shots at extreme distances. His success demonstrated the cartridge's long-range potential and eventually inspired dedicated .50 caliber sniper rifles such as the Barrett M82. What began as an anti-aircraft solution evolved into a long-range anti-material platform capable of engaging targets far beyond the reach of traditional rifles. Despite being more than a century old in design origin, the M2 remains in service today. The modern M2A1 variant includes improvements such as a quick-change barrel system and enhanced safety features, yet the fundamental mechanics remain remarkably similar to Browning's original concept. Few weapons in military history have demonstrated such longevity. From the trenches of World War I development to the skies of World War II, from Korea and Vietnam to modern conflicts, the M2 Browning has continued to serve as a symbol of overwhelming firepower. Its deep, thunderous report remains instantly recognizable, a reminder that sometimes durability, adaptability, and raw power are enough to outlast generations of technological change.